I'll let you do it.
Hold on. Welcome, everybody, to Partners for Progressive Israel and ALEPH, Alliance for Jewish Renewal's Tikkun Haaretz webinar, Israel, Gaza, and the Charge of Genocide, Reflection and Discernment. I'm Rabbi Deborah Kolodny with Tikkun Haaretz, and I'll be your moderator today. My pronouns are they, them. With me is the incredible Margot Hughes Robinson, Executive Director of Partners for Progressive Israel, and the author of the guide that we'll be discussing today. Partners for Progressive Israel is a progressive American Zionist organization dedicated to the achievement of a durable and just peace between the State of Israel and its neighbors, which includes an end to Israel's occupation based on a two-state solution. PPI supports Israelis working to ensure social justice, civil rights, and equality for all of Israel's inhabitants. Partners promotes a just Israeli society by cultivating Jewish-Arab partnerships and seeks to deepen American Jews' understanding of the complexities of both Israeli and Palestinian societies. ALEPH, Alliance for Jewish Renewal, is the mothership for the Jewish Renewal movement and is a container for the ALEPH ordination program for Jewish Renewal affiliated communities from lots of programming, including Tikkun Haaretz, and is a sister organization or a sibling organization to the Jewish Renewal Rabbinic Association, OHALA. Back to Margot. Not only is Rabbi Margot multiply published with both a rabbinic ordination and an MA in Midrash from JTS, she's one of the most brilliant thinkers and activists in the Jewish world today. Do you blush, Margot? I mean, it's been my honor
Very
and
kind.
it's been my honor and pleasure to work with her as both of us represent our respective organizations on the Progressive Israel Network, which is where the idea for this guide had its genesis, I believe. A few housekeeping matters. Please put your questions in the question box. If you look down to the horizontal menu underneath your Zoom box, you'll see something that says Q&A. You just click on that and you could write a question in there. And use the chat for your interactions with one another. You might want to start right now by putting your name and location and pronoun into the chat as we continue our introductions. I'll bring the questions into our conversation after Margot and I have gone through the materials we want to make sure that you are exposed to. To begin, I invite you to settle in, however that feels comfortable. We have a hand raised, um, and I wasn't planning on taking questions. Jenny, is there a need that you have? Can you write something into the chat? Ah, I don't see. Oh, so the chat seems to
I
be
think there's a question in the Q&A as well.
fantastic. Will you be getting the recording? You'll be getting a link to the recording. Thank you, Lenore. And if somebody else has something to say, yeah, the chat is disabled. All right. So use the Q&A to chat with one another, and I will do my best to move through the conversations and find questions. So perhaps if you want to ensure, never mind, Margot just enabled the chat. All right, this is the first time we're doing this webinar together, so we're learning the tech as we go. Thank you, Jenny and John, and thank you, Margot, for enabling the chat. So we'll go back to using the Q&A just for questions. Um, Johnny is a human. Thank you for kicking off the introducing ourselves in the chat. So as you're doing that, as you're introducing yourselves, I invite you to settle in however you do that. Some people like to take a deep breath. Some people like to put their feet flat on the ground and open your hearts to a prayer for peace. This is from the Reconstructionist Siddur Kol HaNeshama, and in English, the words I'm about to chant mean, or are translated as, cause your spirit's influence to emanate upon all dwellers of our holy land, Remove from their midst hatred and enmity, jealousy and wickedness. Plant in their hearts love and kinship, peace and friendship, and soon fulfill the vision of your prophet. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation. Let them learn no longer ways of war. Ha'atzel meruchacha, meruchacha. Al kol yoshvei eretz kodshenu, eretz kodshenu. Hasem kibam sinah, ve'eva kina bereshut, ve'ta belibam ahava, ve'achava shalom ve'reyut. V'kayem bimhera, bimhera. Chazon niviecha, niviecha. Lo yisagoy el goy cherev, lo yimadu od milchama. Lo yisagoy el goy cherev, v'nomar Amen.
Amen.
To the meat of our conversation, Israel, Gaza, and the charge of genocide, reflection and discernment. Rabbi Margot, would you ground us for a few minutes in the work of Partners for Progressive Israel, your constituency, your focus, and your highlights of your history, so we get a sense of the container from which this guide came?
Absolutely. So Partners for Progressive Israel has existed for I think 35 years. We're hitting now in 2026 our 35th anniversary, I believe, but under a couple of different names. For a long time, we were known until about 7 or 8 years ago as Meretz USA. We have a historic connection with the Meretz Party in the Knesset, and we still maintain a relationship with the World Union of Meretz, which is just rebranded as the World Union of Progressive Zionists. But I think it's actually a good sort of starting place in terms of who we are. We also have sort of a like sister cousin relationship with the Hashomer Hatzair youth movement, also through that Union of Progressive Zionist relationship. So we're US based. We're a Zionist organization. We're a member of the American movement, American Zionist movement, but we're really dedicated right to a just and durable peace between the state of Israel and its neighbors. And we believe that that just and durable peace can only be predicated on the end of the occupation. And when I say occupation, I'm referring to the internationally recognized military occupation of the West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem, although East Jerusalem has a different status. We can get into that in a little bit, right? That's existed since 1967. So we also, in addition to that sort of outward facing work, we support Israelis working for on social justice issues, human rights issues, equality for all of Israel's inhabitants. We do a lot of Jewish-Palestinian partnership work, both in the land and here in the United States. And what we are really focused on, especially since October 7th, is connecting American progressives within the Jewish community and beyond to progressive movements and progressive leaders in the land, especially in Israel proper and within the West Bank. So this can be anything from Knesset members to grassroots movements and leaders. We really try to give people a sense of the spectrum that's out there and provide bridges to be in deeper relationship with the people doing the good work on the ground. I think especially right in an era that's so characterized by a very binary polarization. The left, like the struggling but also very vibrant left in Israel Palestine often gets ignored. And a lot of what we do is try to make people not just aware, but offer connection to the people who are living out progressive values and trying to make them a reality on the ground in Israel and Palestine.
Thank you so much. I want to encourage everyone after the webinar to go to PPI's website and find out more details on what they're working on. I had the pleasure of knowing about PPI for a very long time because the current chair, Paul Shem, and I were both members of Farbrengen, which is a chavurah in Washington, D.C. for a very long time. He still is.
Yeah.
So Next question.
And is a co-author of this guide, I should say also. I am not the sole author of this guide. A number of members of our board worked extraordinarily hard and offered a lot of excellent feedback as we drafted this. And I can, in good faith, take sole responsibility for this document. Although
Shemati.
I am very proud of it.
Shemati, I hear you. So, why is a Zionist organization talking about genocide in Gaza?
I think because it is really hard. It is extraordinarily painful, right? Just as some table setting. Um, every hour I spent working on this guide and that we spent collectively as an organization, there were moments where I felt like physically unwell. Like I don't think I can overstate the difficulty of this conversation, not just for me, but I think for a lot of people in Jewish communities, and in the Zionist world. And we feel that we can't ignore it. Right to I think see this conversation is happening whether we like it or not, right? The ICC and the ICJ, the International Human Rights Court systems, have made charges and are currently investigating accusations against specific members of the Israeli government and leadership, as well as Hamas, to be clear, who has also clearly committed war crimes and moved with genocidal intent. And I'm sure we'll talk about intent later on in this webinar. But we felt that if we didn't have the conversation, we kind of ceded the ground to people who are not in deep relationship with Jewish communities necessarily, or who are not going to have this conversation with not just the relationships, but like the care that we felt it deserved. We also noticed that in so many conversations we've had since, in the last 2.5 years since this war began in Israel and Palestine, that it was sort of the elephant in the room, right? That there was sort of like, do you use this word? Do you not? Are we? We saw it becoming a litmus test in so many places, and also like a stumbling block to more open and honest conversation and bridge building with both within our partnerships within the Jewish world, but also our multi-faith, multi-heritage partners outside of the Jewish world, both Palestinians, but also a lot of Christian and Muslim groups here in the U.S. who are all really grappling with this. And we felt that if partners could make plain where we got stuck and what is helping us move through and more deeply into this conversation, that it might be useful for other people. It was sort of not designed, and if you look at the guide, I'll post the link in the chat in a minute. If you look at the guide, it's not designed to sort of hit people over the head and say there's one answer to this and you have to arrive here. It's here's how we got to where we are. Here's how we landed. Here's how we what we needed to hear and what we needed to understand as an organization to be able to sit at the table and discuss an accusation of genocide in the context of this war. And we think that we know that other people are getting stuck, and so we're really offering this as a like, come along with us, right? With my rabbinical hat on, I think I've tried to describe this in some ways as like long form pastoral care. Like God willing, this is sort of a trellis to where a richer, more complex, and more emotionally sensitive conversation can grow, ideally.
I remember when we were talking about it at PIN, at the Progressive Israel Network, I asked the group, well, the conversation was coming up because people are saying, look, our constituents are talking about this. Our constituents don't know how to talk about it. Our constituents are triggered by talking about it. What should we be saying? What should we be doing? Should we be saying something collectively? Um, and I don't remember all the details of that conversation, but at some point I said, as Jewish leaders, some of us ordained, what's our moral authority telling us? Like what's our obligation in this moment to speak or to remain silent? So I, for one, was thrilled when PPI took on this task. What a huge service to the entire Jewish world, wherever you locate yourself.
Yeah,
So,
I appreciate it. I think it really is, yeah, trying to intend it as service, God
mhm,
willing.
yeah. How did PPI come to the decision about identifying Israel's actions in Gaza as genocide? What was your process? What did you struggle with? What aspects of the conversation, if any, were easier than you expected?
So I'm actually going to go ahead and just drop the link in the chat to the guide in case people want to follow along, because I will be kind of referencing this document pretty heavily. So I think a big part of it was our relationship to international law, right? I don't think I am at all the first rabbi, right, to articulate that our notion of human rights as articulated in the second half of the 20th century, especially in the face of the Holocaust, is in some ways a secularization of Jewish theology that has been in use and has been essential for thousands of years, right? The idea that every person, I think with my rabbi kippah on, I would say is created B'Tselem Elohim in the image of God, but right in sort of the secular language of international human rights law to say we have a mutual agreement as human beings on this earth and governments that governments are responsible to their people and have obligations towards the people that they serve, God willing, in a democratic system that elect them, but not, even if they're unelected, but that also every human being has inalienable rights. Um, and right that these the texts and the precedent and the Genocide Convention, right? All of these are only actually as strong as the institutions and communities that articulate and enforce them. So part of this is understanding that if Jewish safety in the United States, globally, in Israel, right, it's okay to name our self-interest in this. If that is not taken seriously and upheld, right, then like that has an impact on the wider international struggle and structure of human rights. And similarly, right, like a lack of recognition of the experiences and recognition of Palestinian human rights actually endangers these structures for everyone. And there are clear assertions of the rights of civilians during wars and in the face of mass atrocity. I think we were also really interested, again, not in this being a litmus test where if you use it, you're on our side, and if you don't use this word, you're not. Like, we really wanted to actually push back again against that bifurcation, but instead say, there is a concept in international law that was actually used really effectively in, I think, in Kenya and some other countries in the 90s and early 2000s, that instead of talking just about rights, also talks about responsibilities. And so there's this idea from the mid 2000s that was articulated called the responsibility to protect. That the UN Secretary General sort of, I think, officially authorized in 2005. And this idea that the global community actually has a responsibility to step in and a responsibility to protect people when governments fail. When we get to this point of breakdown in the international rule of law, it's that we need to also proactively step in. And we wrote in the guide, right, that ultimately a lot of people, and I think with very good reason, say this is a legal definition and we need to let The Hague sort of suss this out. I will say, right, in this country, in Israel, in Palestine, and a lot of other places, right, the legitimacy of The Hague and the international courts of human law are actually human rights are being threatened right now. But we didn't want to just wait for this evaluation down the line when many, many, many human rights experts are already saying what we are witnessing, what we were witnessing. Right, there's a ceasefire, but the ceasefire is frequently violated right now within Gaza. That to look and basically wait a decade, God forbid, after this resolves and sit with a lot of regret and say, well, now international investigation bodies have concluded this is a genocide and we feel awful. We wanted to play the role that we could, right? We want to right size the role, but play the real role that we could as an organization who cares about Jews, who cares about Palestinians, who's in relationship with people all over the land, right? From the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, and say, what could we do in this moment from our lane to play some role in helping to stop this violence right now?
Thank you. I think the piece about being accountable and responsible world actors and also having some sense of responsibility for the moment and the having a definition or an articulation or a declaration of genocide and how it changes what our obligations are in terms of accountability makes really strong sense. Somebody wrote a note that they're having a problem with sound. I don't know if anyone else is having a problem. It doesn't seem that way. So I don't know how to troubleshoot that. But sound is okay from someone else. Thank you. So perhaps, Karen, it's on your end. And I'm sorry to hear that that's happening. Um, So you've already answered the question. Great. Thank you very much, folks, for chiming in about why. So for friends who are already looking at the guide, we're kind of going to track through the table of contents now to go through what's in the guide. And you've already, Rabbi Margot, talked about why make a statement on genocide. So the next piece of the guide asks, did a genocide start on October 8th, 2023?
I will say I feel a little bit silly, right? And that I just said a lot about the need to not wait for investigative bodies. But again, we really have tried to right size our lane here and say we are not human rights lawyers, so we are not actually able to make the determination of when exactly this started. Right? I think we can use the tools that we have and spend a lot of time in UN working papers. I'm happy to share links with people to sort of figure out what was happening in the fall of 2024 when we published this. But um, it is I don't have actually the expertise to go in and say on this day exactly a war started. Part of the difference between sort of repeated mass civilian loss and what can be characterized as a genocide is, and I've now learned through the process of this, is establishing intent. And I do understand that because these statements that have been now used right in accusations of genocide in international criminal courts as part of the proof of intent did come from Israeli government officials on October 8th, October 9th, October 10th, early November 2023. I think some people go, well, the intent was established right on October 8th, so then we can say that this day started on October 8th. I went to rabbinical school for a long time, but I don't have a degree in human rights, and I will let the lawyers figure out the exact date. But I do think it's important to note that people, when they say that, it's not coming from nowhere. It's coming from a recognition that people in power in Israel, within the Israeli government and within the Israeli military, who were, of course, speaking from a place of deep pain, um, said things that were genocidal in nature and have now been classified as demonstrating genocidal intent. And we've actually took out and sort of to illustrate the guide, so to speak, we actually took out a lot of quotes from these officials. So you can see from IDF Colonel Erez Eshel, from Tali Gottlieb, from Aharon Haliva, right? I think even Bougie Herzog, the president of Israel, right, said some things that really, I'm being generous in my characterization here, but collapsed the distinction between combatant and civilian, even in the case of children in his early statements after October 7th. And I do actually think we can ask more of our leaders. I know sometimes we're not used to it in Israel or Palestine or in the US, right? But it's actually reasonable to expect our leaders to adhere to international law even when they are feeling extraordinarily activated, even in a moment of personal and communal grief. That's in fact the responsibility of our elected officials, is to set and uphold that standard in what they say in public. Um, and right, there is still a difference between word and action. And I think it will probably take a lot of analysis of military orders and which military orders, right, came out on which days and were implemented where, and that requires a level of also just like access and investigation that we don't have access to yet, in part because um a lot of, right, like external international monitors and journalists have not been given free access to Gaza. We don't actually know. Part of the reason we wrote this guide is we don't know the extent of what happened and what is happening right now in Gaza. We only have a fraction of the information. Some of those people, that information come from sources that the general public would, I think, reasonably define as reliable. Some of them are not. So part of the reason we made a permanent guide and not a webinar is that this conversation is not going away, and we want people to have an emotional and baseline, academic reference point to start. Because as we get more and more information, I anticipate this conversation is going to get, in some ways, more and more overwhelming. I
So
see in the chat also, right? There's an assumption that our world leaders are
hold on,
operating.
hold on.
Oh, go
Before you
ahead.
go to
Yes,
the chat, because there's
totally.
five
I'm going off, but
questions. There's five questions, and I want to give time to them first because that's where we told people to put their comments. I also want to say I'm not looking at the guide, but certainly Ben Gavir and Smotrich have said things that are clearly seem to intend genocide. So
Exactly.
John Weiss asked, isn't it vital to recognize genocidal intent on both sides? Didn't a genocide begin on October 7th?
Absolutely, yes. And we read about this in the guide. Hamas clearly demonstrated an intent to commit genocide on October 7th when they crossed the broke the border and broke through Israeli security into kibbutzim and into the Negev. It was clearly demonstrated, and that's why they have also been charged. I will note, I believe two of the three individuals who've been charged from Hamas by international um, bodies are no longer alive. And so those prosecutions they're not ongoing in the same way because they've been killed in the course of the war or presumed dead. Um, but yes, I think it is vital to recognize genocidal intent and then also capability and power and action. That's why we don't say it started right on October 8th, because we're also looking at the 2.5 years of actions on the other side. And John, I really appreciate the sensitivity that you just added in the chat. Yes, calling out, right, we actually must distinguish the difference between Hamas and the Palestinian people in Gaza. Um,
Before you continue to respond to the comments, because people have asked questions in the question document, so let's like track with those first. Some of them have been there for a while. Jesse Kleinman says, my concern about the use of the term genocide as a routine part of demonstrations is its use to question Israel's existence. Its repetition at almost every anti-Trump demonstration, and its tendency to excuse anti-Semitic attacks, such as Bondi. Other than that, it does seem to me that Israel has crossed the line, although it is a borderline case. Do you have any thoughts on that?
In short, yes. Yeah, we think it's really, really important to reiterate human rights are not a zero-sum game. This is actually why, as an organization, right, with ties to a broader Zionist movement and with a commitment to human rights, it feels so important to be holding this space, is to say, the human rights of Israelis are also inalienable. They are just as inalienable as the human rights of Palestinians. Um, and countries do not go away when um, when a genocide occurs. Actually, right, there are a number of countries I bet that we could all probably think of, right, that have been investigated or accused of or have been found guilty of committing genocide. And it didn't mean that those countries disappeared. It did sometimes mean that their governments were pretty radically transformed. And sometimes that was an external, project of international intervention. We do not have a position on this, to be clear, but we do respect the sovereignty of Israelis, just like we respect the sovereignties of Palestinians. Um, but that actually, right, there's no denying, right, that a lot of people are eagerly taking advantage of the horrible things that the Israeli government has perpetrated and using it to fuel anti-Semitism and to say things like Israel doesn't deserve to exist. We're aware of that, and we don't think that that is enables us to then walk away from this conversation. We want a democratic Israel, and I think we think holding the Israeli government accountable as an international community is actually an important guardrail and able to ensure an existing democracy at the end of all of this.
So, something that's happening that's making our conversation a little more difficult is that people are posting comments, which are really conversational, in the questions, and people are posting questions in the chat. So, it's becoming difficult for me as your moderator to discern what to share with you as a question. And knowing that Shoshana and Alan, and Jesse, and sorry, Jesse, I already read yours, and Eitan, you're asking wonderful questions, which really could be beautiful in the chat. So could you cut and paste them out of questions and put them in the chat? Everyone can see them then, and you could have a robust exchange in the chat if you like. And it does seem that one question in the chat really does really is begging to be asked to you. Michael wrote, "You have mentioned Hamas's genocidal intent." Oh, it moved a little bit. Oh, it keeps moving because people keep adding. I'm not aware of any statements of genocidal intent. Can you cite any of them?
Sure. My understanding is that Hamas has published documents right where they have said they would like to, or that their goal is to destroy in whole or in part the national, ethnic, or racial or religious group, being Jewish Israelis. Right, I'm referencing right now in the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, right, the Genocide Convention at the UN. Right, Article 2 is trying to is committing acts with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. So that can be mass killing, causing serious bodily or mental harm to people, deliberately inflicting conditions of life that brings about that physical destruction, imposing measures to prevent births. With Physicians for Human Rights has done a lot of great work actually on how that's actually been present in what's been happening in Gaza and forcibly transferring the children of one group to another group. I will say that last one is particularly relevant vis-a-vis the accusations actually that the international community is investigating right now against Russia with the forced mass transfer allegedly of many children from Ukraine into Russia and into Russian orphanages. Um, so to yeah, so the Hamas Charter, but a number of other documents. They have not been shy, right, in sharing what their intent is. But again, I want to shift the difference between or hold, right, that there is a gap often between intent and might and ability to make manifest. I will also say, what the focus of this guide is the accusation against Israel. There are many, many, many good resources that exist there, that exist sort of on the internet and in a lot of scholarly publications going into Hamas's intent, capabilities, what have you. And we address it in the guide, but also actually outside the scope of my expertise, um, beyond what I've shared.
All right, Margot, I'm going to take you back to our intended conversation. Um, it's wonderful that everybody is so spirited in their curiosity and engagement, but there are a few more things that we wanted to make sure that you heard from Margot. What is happening in Gaza, many say, doesn't look like the Holocaust, and that is because it isn't. Say more.
I think what is so difficult for a lot of us in the Jewish community, um, right, is that to be Jewish is to carry around with us the history of being the victims of a number of mass atrocities, expulsions, throughout history, and sort of the trope originator in terms of genocide in the Holocaust. Although genocides, right, did occur before the Holocaust, um, it continues to, I think, even be a question in our communities, right? Like, how do we even integrate the experience of the Shoah into history and into the understanding of what has happened to Jewish people and into our, a lot of human rights law was right developed initially in response to the magnitude of horror of the Holocaust. Um, and at the same time, the Holocaust is not the only genocide that has occurred within the last 200 years, right? We can look at, um, there are still living survivors of genocides in Armenia and in Namibia, frequently less and less, though, right? And we've witnessed even in our own, or I'll say my own lifetime, right? Genocides in Srebrenica, in Rwanda and Darfur, in Myanmar and Burma, and of the Yazidis by ISIS or ISIL, right? This is not the only charge of genocide that the international human rights bodies are currently investigating, right? They're looking at what's happening in Russia. People are looking at the actions of the former Philippine government, like against its own people. Um, right? Some people argue that things that happened in Indonesia several decades ago may meet the definition. Um, And we don't claim, right, that the Israeli government is actively trying to exterminate every single Palestinian, although several elected officials in the Israeli government have made clear statements that reflect that intent. Um, but I think we have to be able to sit, again, it's not disregard one for the other, but sit in the reality of the legal definition of genocide that is enforceable and that would incur a responsibility by the international community to respond. It doesn't have to look like the Holocaust. The Holocaust is mechanized mass murder on another scale. Um, but again, we it can't be a limitation that then we cannot talk about what is happening right now. I see a question in the chat, even why does everything have to be compared with the Holocaust? I think it's actually normal and reasonable for Jews to use our own communal experience and history as a measuring stick. It just cannot be the only measuring stick if we want to uphold international law.
So I invite everyone to center and ground. And Margot, I'm going to ask you a couple of more questions because, again, I want to make sure that we get through the material that we planned for this conversation. Um, you've already touched on this a bit, but if the Israeli government is perpetuating genocide, what are the consequences of that?
Um, so there would be have to be an accountability process that likely looks it's going to there's no cookie cutter map in my understanding of exactly, if are found guilty or if your leader is found guilty of XYZ war crimes, the consequences are then XYZ, right? This is going to have to be worked out by a jury, by judges with an immense amount of expertise. But I can talk about what I think the fears in our community are. Again, any international or internal accountability for a genocide does not mean that Israeli civilians in any way forfeit their recognition of their own human rights and their own national rights as a people, right? Again, it's already come up on this webinar. People have a real fear. Some of it's unspoken, sometimes it's explicit that somehow Israel will cease to exist if these war crimes are confronted. And there are real threats from countries and movements that are overtly hostile to Israel, that say things that exacerbate, that make threats that exacerbate this fear. But that's not on the table in the organized international community. And it is not in the purview of the International Criminal Court or the International Court of Justice. Um, Right. Actually, this year at the UN, only a few months ago, there was this massive vote in the UN General Assembly to comprehensively recognize Israel's international standing as part of a support for a two-state solution for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. My my real concern as an Ohevet Zion, right? Somebody who loves this land, loves the Jewish people deeply, loves all of the people who live on the land, is that countries that embrace uh, ethnic cleansing or kind of have large scale war crimes that go unchecked often are governments that do not survive. If we want Israel to continue existing, this kind of deep reckoning is actually essential. But again, holding a country accountable does not negate its people's rights to self-determination and international recognition. Um, a large scale, terrifying war, um, right, would actually be a greater threat. I also want to note because right, it's activating for me to have this conversation, and I helped to write the darn resource. It's clearly, a lot's coming up in the chat, a lot's coming up in the Q&A. I do want to offer the opportunity. This does not have to be the only time that we are in conversation or that I'm in conversation with any attendees here or your communities. Right? This is a document that we can come back to. I am happy to come to your community to facilitate a conversation about it. It's so clear to me actually from everybody's reaction as this is ongoing how badly we need to have this conversation and how many of us are desperately sitting on questions and fears. And again, this is designed as an opening up, not a putting back in a box and neatly concluding. If you leave with more questions and answers that I've done my job, God willing, as a human rights activist and a rabbi. But this also I want to offer does not have to be the end of the conversation.
So I just want to piggyback on that comment and acknowledge David Abraham made a post that said, I don't think a definitive assessment of Hamas is necessary to assess Israel's actions. And I do hope we can focus. I mean, there's so many who are refusing to engage in the conversation about whether or not what's happened in Gaza, what's continuing to happen in Gaza, is constitutes a genocide. That in and of itself is a an extraordinarily robust conversation that has extraordinary merits. I also want to just note that for the most part, genocide is something that's determined after the fact for the reasons that Margot already articulated, Rabbi Margot, which is that it's very, very difficult to get all the information that's necessary for all kinds of reasons while the conflict is continuing. So this is not a conversation for this moment that will stop when this webinar ends. This conversation, exploration, interrogation, analysis is going to continue for years to come. So a couple of questions in the Q&A from Johannes. Dear Rabbi Margot, and I'm saying that because it's so beautifully opened, how is your voice heard by mainstream Judaism in the US? Do you cooperate with J Street and other similar organizations? Thanks from Germany.
Absolutely. Well, I'll note, right, there's no endorsement of this guide from any other organization besides partners. I think a lot of folks to our right will have problems with it. A lot of folks from our left will have problems with it. Actually, if we're getting about equal frustration from both sides, we are, I won't say doing the right thing, but we are probably squarely in our lane of where we're supposed to be. Um, but yes, like we are not outside of the tent, as it were, in Jewish um communal life. We're on the Progressive Israel Network with a host of organizations, including ALEPH, including J Street, including a number of others. I'll also note J Street right founder and president Jeremy Ben-Ami said earlier this year that he no longer plans to argue with people who would characterize what has happened as a genocide, even if he won't use it itself. Our Jewish community has to, again, I'm sorry for repeating myself, but I think has to grapple with this question because it is being had um, in quiet or in undercurrents in a lot of our communities and out loud outside of our communities very, very frequently. Um, but yes, I don't think we're outside. I will say we anticipated a lot more blowback to releasing this guide, and mostly what we have actually been met with from the progressive but like in what I'll call the manufactured mainstream, but still the manufactured but still a mainstream of the Jewish world has been relief. That I think a lot of us are desperate to have this conversation and want a starting place and want a place that feels safe enough that we can be brave to ask questions and to investigate and to have this painful conversation. And that's why we wanted to help create, right? It's document as resource, but also God willing, like document as space.
And I just want to say, Johannes, it's not just Rabbi Margot who's having these conversations. Many of us are having these conversations. And I also am met with a mix of responses, but a great deal of relief for the permission to have the conversation that somebody who is considered a mainstream Jewish organization would put forth such a resource opens doors that were not open before. I've had many conversations with folks who have been doing work in the Israel-Palestine space for decades, who have PhDs, who are diplomats, professional diplomats, who understand every jot, tittle, nuance of the horrific behavior that Israel has exhibited, and also that Hamas has exhibited, not just on October 7th, but in other times, and also of Netanyahu's support for Hamas and also for Netanyahu's ignoring of the initial attacks because it benefited him. Now, I'm sorry, I'm making this about what I think. There's so much heinousness that we could point to. Um, the more permission we give to uh, tell the truth, the more permission we give to allow the sunlight to shine on what's actually been happening and is happening, the better it is for the Jewish world, even if some people are uncomfortable. or stressed out about it. Miriam Buckman asks, how do you define your Zionism, Rabbi Margot, when people might say, we know Zionism has many strands, but the mainstream Zionism has led to this government and this atrocity?
I'm so glad you asked. We address this actually directly in the guide. I feel like a really big part of my work, right, as someone who's trying to connect progressives to Israeli and Palestinian progressives, is sitting with a lot of people who have grown up in communities that, if they were not Zionists or in conversation with Zionism or Zionisms plural to go, right, for many Jews or for some Jews, but I would say still for many, right, Zionism is a multivocal, multifaceted, originally political, and now also in a lot of places religious and social movements, whether we're talking about religious Zionism, the substrand, or Zionism, the civic religion, right? But this body of sort of this tapestry of ideology and effects and conversations and ideas, um, right, that began as a among um a wave of nationalism and the nation state as sort of a political invention. And I apologize to any political scientists on the call who might put this more finely than I would, right? But like one nationalism among many that were articulated in the mid early to mid 1800s. And for many Palestinians, for the majority of Palestinians, Zionism is not about its animating ideas or its internal beliefs or interrogations, but is about the praxis and what it has meant and the legacy of exclusion and displacement that they have experienced in a land they also recognize as their homeland. So I'll just quote actually directly from the guide, right? Because we have kind of this holding both that's required as a backdrop. And then the reality, right? That right now there is an ultra-nationalist government that often even embraces Kahanist ideology in the current administration running Israel, and that those ultranationalist and Kahanist threads did not just magically show up a few years ago. They have been present among a larger conversation within the Zionist community for decades. And right, we as Jews are aware of and embrace the multivocal political conversation that has fueled the Jewish national project for a century and a half. And we have to acknowledge at the same time, right? And work, not just acknowledge, but really work to more effectively reject not only the existence of this kind of strain of thought, but its actualization in the land, right? Zionism for many Palestinians is about the material consequences for generations of Palestinians. And for Jews, it's often about thoughts and also some of the material consequences. Um, but I think we have to kind of hold all of it if we're being intellectually honest, but also if we want to make change that is real and sticky and not just reactive.
So, I have a few more questions from our original design for today, and then there's a few more questions in the Q&A. So I'm going to jump forward a little bit to our original thoughts. To me, partners came to this question from the highest level of intellectual acuity and analytical rigor. Others in the conversation are not coming from that place. How can this resource help Jews and others frame the conversation so that it's fact-based, it's rigorous, and it's defensible?
I mean, I will say these are not new responses or ideas or ones that are specific to this conversation, right? But I do think two things that are helpful are a breakup with closure. That is something I've actually learned in my like ongoing learning and spiritual practice of anti-racism as a white woman, right? That going into a conversation thinking, we've scheduled this for 90 minutes, so in exactly 90 minutes we'll arrive at the answer and we'll be set. That actually viewing this is where I think being engaged with spirituality is really an incredible tool, right? Being engaged with this is a practice and these conversations the way they would be a prayer practice or a mindful eating practice or what have you, right? This is going to be long and slow, and you are going to make mistakes and you are going to step in it. And because it doesn't stop when you make a mistake, right, you will be able to repair and keep going and keep learning. So to break up with the idea that there will be a magical point of closure, even if, God willing, there is a resolution to the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians and an end to the occupation, God willing, speedily and in our days, right, we will still be in this work deeply. And right, from the disability justice community, I've really learned and loved the phrase nothing about us without us. Please make sure you are talking to not just a token Jew and a token Palestinian, but engaging with a variety of Jewish voices and Israeli voices and Palestinian voices. And I'm naming those as three different identities because for some people, right, two to all of them overlap, and some people stand sort of in one of those buckets. But like to make sure you're actually engaging with this is what we try to do with partners with the multivocality of these communities and not saying there's just one Israeli or there's just one Jewish or there's just one Palestinian opinion or way to be or analysis of this. This is people's whole lives. This is generations of people. And like to really be prepared and to gear up to sit in that complexity, it is much, much harder. It is not going to feel as good. It's not the dopamine hit, right, of like posting a hot take online. But again, it is stickier and it is effective, and it is what I think is actually going to drive some real change here.
Thank you. There's at least 5 questions in the chat that all ask, can you send the link again for the guide? It's in the Q&A. The link is now in the Q&A. The link has been placed in the chat 4 times in response to that. But if you don't find it in the chat, just go to the Partners for Progressive Israel website. It's so easy to navigate to find it. So, and perhaps when we send out a link for the Zoom, we can also send out a link for the guide so that for the recording of the Zoom.
And I
So
think the link was also in the promotional emails we sent out as well, and in the
fantastic.
description of the session.
Thank you. So there's a rather long question, and I'm not going to repeat all of it about speaking about this topic with Israeli family, whose Israeli identity is central to their overall identity. And if in trying to speak with Israeli family about what happened in Gaza, it's scary. In the words of the questioner, if I were to speak about it, it would cause a balagan. So I don't. What I do express is my belief that the military response was disproportionate and the 67,000 people who were killed did not need to die. But even that does not work. And his response is often, what else could we have done? Hamas was about to destroy Israel and they left us no choice. How do I push back on those deep-seated Israeli bred narrative points of my family with compassion?
Ooh, I will say that if I had the magic, forget 2 minute answer, 10-minute answer to this, I would be giving it out all the time. There is no one way that we are going to pull people into conversation, but what I will say I've learned right as an organizer with some experience in like deep canvassing work, as well as I'm not saying that Israeli narratives are conspiratorial, but also I will say things I have learned from reading about how people have pulled their families out of in other situations, like very intense, sort of closed worldviews. Again, I'm not characterizing all Israeli worldviews in that way, but rather reflecting on the social science that's come out of those conversations. Um, is that prioritizing the relationship over the conversation is often what keeps people coming back to the table. Again, it will not be undone in one conversation, but I think to the extent that we can prioritize a relationship and like again, this is the breakup with closure, letting there be room for a part two, a part three, a part 17 is the way we are going to move our communities through this work. And I do think for both American Jews and Israeli Jews, one of the like great spiritual tasks of our era, both for Jewish leaders, but like for just for Jews, for the Jews who I love, um, is sitting with people through the real and legitimate heartbreak that a series of narratives that many of us grew up with or learned as adults but held very dearly um, about Israel and about Palestinians and about Israel-Palestine are are not all encompassing and in many times are not accurate. And actually arriving at that place is a moment of breakage and real heartbreak. And I think if you can be attentive to the person in front of you and to the heartbreak that you are asking the person to walk through in order to hear the information, the new, even if you're just offering facts, um, I think that is the biggest thing because like ultimately we are going to have to get through this together as a community. International bodies of law are going to, God willing, do what they do and do it well and effectively. Right, but most of us are not in a courtroom. Most of us are sitting around a table with each other. And I think being attentive to that relationship, it's not, you know, I'm not saying this for the sake of like holding hands and shalom bayit and preserving your family, but like actually what will change people's minds is stories over facts, like narrate like whole stories about human people and human beings and saying, this is my friend. They live in the West Bank. Here's what they've experienced the last 3 years. Is much better than like, here's a New York Times article I want to forward you. And being attentive to the relationship and making sure the relationship is solid enough to hold another conversation after the one that you're having.
There is so much richness in the comments in the chat. I just want to acknowledge and express gratitude for everyone who's speaking there. We won't be able to bring all of that into our conversation. It's 12:55. So but I don't want to have you think we're ignoring you. As we can, we are both paying attention to speaking to the room, speaking to each other, staying on track, and also seeing that there's so much richness in the chat. So thank you very much. I want to lift up one comment that really spoke to me. Simcha Zevet said, "So much of what's being shared speaks to the necessity of Jewish leaders to grow in our capacity to hold complexity, multiple truths, and stay in process without having concrete answers, and to create spaces where we teach these skills to others." And I wanted to add to that, it's not just about skills. I feel like we're in a global moment where every human has got to learn to heal our nervous systems and to be able to self-soothe and co-regulate and stay present with curiosity as opposed to grandiosity and righteousness. And even in the conversations that's happening here, some of us are really, really sure we're right. And are expressing ourselves in a way to like have gotcha moments. And I think unless everyone who's really on the same side and wants the same thing can express them ourselves in ways that say, I'm curious about what you said. And I think I have a different, I have new information or different information than you. Maybe we could talk about it. And I'm using this tone of voice really consciously. It's hard in texting and in, putting something into a chat. But I really think one of the things we need to be able to do, and one of the things this guide is so helpful for, is to be able to speak with one another from a place of assumption that we want the health and welfare and peace and justice for all human beings on this planet to be a priority and to be actualized, and that we want reparations and that we want an end to fascism and oligarchy and kleptomaniacal, governance. We really do. I believe everybody on this call really wants all of those things. Really wants all of those things. So it's 12:58. Do you have a last word that you want to leave people with, Margot, Rabbi Margot?
I think I'll just echo that like I think the spiritual work of our era um is to grow the muscle of sitting in discomfort. And again, we wrote this guide and offer this guide as a tool actually for that. It is both a means to an end and an educational process and a precedent setting for our communities. And we have a very ambitious vision for what can be done with this. And I think it's an opportunity. It's another tool in your toolbox of stretching that muscle of sitting in discomfort. Because I don't think we are going to make the change that we need if we're not willing to be in that place. But also a lot of gratitude, and please let this not be the end. Please reach out to partners. Please share the guide with your communities. I am more than happy to speak with your community in person on Zoom, facilitate these conversations. I know it can often be easier to pull in an outside person, especially if you're in a leadership role in a community or organization. But thank you again for everybody for being here and being in it with us.
Yeah, and I just want to say we've asked everybody when they registered what brought you to this space, whether you came through PPI channels or through ALEPH channels. So hopefully we'll have a sense. And for me, speaking from ALEPH, to the extent that we have information of that you came to today's conversation through ALEPH, you'll be hearing from me not only with the information about the recording and the guide, but also about future webinars that we're having with Jewish, Israelis, and Palestinian activists who are working for justice, reparations, peace. And I use those words intentionally because we really seek to elevate voices that are doing the work on the ground and not American voices who are speaking about what we think should happen so that we can be, I don't know, in integrity with reality and not imposing ourselves on others. Um, this webinar was set up by PPI. Is it possible for us to download the chat? Do you know? And if it is, then we're gonna see maybe if we could send that out too, because I feel a little bit of a responsibility. I want to make sure everybody's real
I think that
thoughtfulness.
that is available in the recordings as well.
Great, 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 great. Thank you so much, everybody. And to those who are clergy in the renewal world who are making your way near Philadelphia very soon, I hope to see you at the Ohala conference. And for everyone else, I hope our paths cross and we get to work together and break bread together. Well, for me, it would be gluten-free bread and really do our peacemaking and our justice-making work in the world. Thank you so much, Rabbi Margot, and
Again
thank
for
you,
having me.
PPI. And we're going to close down and say bye-bye.
Take care.